David will be presenting for us on creating a culture of classroom discussion. Now, David Bott has been a secondary teacher for 19 years, and he's currently at the Jingxin Academy in Taipei, and he's been mostly focused on English language arts. Now, he also has an interest in history and computer programming, and this has led him to consider how to incorporate technology into the classroom. He's also jumped into professional development opportunities offered by various platforms, and that has included also becoming a Neopod certified trainer. With a background in linguistics, his lifelong passion remains language and literature. And on that note, if I may, I would like to hand the microphone over to David Bott. Thank you, David.
All right, thank you for your very kind introduction. Everyone who's joined, I'm so happy to be here with you to share something that I've become increasingly passionate about, which is classroom conversations. And this question of how can we develop a culture of conversation. When I first started out teaching, I was constantly maybe let down, frustrated, disappointed in the quality of the conversation that would come out of my prompts, and I didn't know what was wrong. So after some study, some coursework, and trying to put some ideas into practice, and while I put them into practice, I gathered some data, and I really worked on this for a while. So what I'd like to do today is to just share that process with you, and share some things I've both learned and found out about this. So starting out, we know that students want to interact. If you teach any grade level, but I will say especially grades 4 through 8, you know they want to interact. They are talking all the time. But we want to get them interacting academically, I think. We also know that students enjoy thinking on their feet, and we know they want to try out new ideas. So then why don't classroom conversations always work out? And so to begin today, I want to talk about these two causes. One being ineffective prompts, and the other being misguided mindsets from our students. And after I go over these two problems, I'll talk about how I've gone about trying to fix them, and how I've included technology in that process. So let's start out with ineffective prompts. So here you see a conversation on the right-hand side. This is a conversation from my class. It was a 7th grade class, and we read a story called The Wonder Horse. And to give you a quick idea about what The Wonder Horse is about, it's about a horse that nobody's ever been able to catch, but then one day somebody catches it. But they couldn't keep the horse under their control. The horse actually jumped over a fence, getting injured in the process. And one of the themes was that there's a struggle for freedom. You've got to go through difficulty in order to make a point. So I came up with this prompt. Please don't laugh at me. And it was, do you need to go through a difficult experience yourself to learn a lesson? And this is one of the conversations that resulted from it. I think the narrator didn't need this experience to learn what he learned, because he can learn this lesson when another thing happened another day. So I think you don't need this experience, and he can also learn this in some stories. Student B, but I think he should have the experience and he can learn what he learned. If you met an experience, that thing you learned will be more specific, not what, yes, I agree with you. We are done. And I don't know if this rings true for some of you who are here with us today, but this is the kind of thing that I would get quite a bit. And so we can see that there's not really a building of ideas. We have people who are trying to come up with the right answer right away. And then we don't really see whether or not they're even listening to each other. And then they sort of just finish when they finish. They say they agree with each other, even though there's nothing to really agree about yet. It hasn't gone anywhere. So I figured that the problem here is, one of the problems is the prompt. So these are some things that I've come across that make it an effective conversation prompt. So number one, we've got to make sure that the prompt is academically engaging. The prompt that I just shared with you is not. It's basically a yes or no question. So the problem is not with the students in this case, it's with me, it's the teacher. An effective prompt should also require students to think and build ideas. And I think what I found is that actually has to be explicitly said in the prompt in some sort of way. The prompt should also encourage students to learn from one another, because we all have diverse backgrounds and we all have our own unique ideas to share. And if that's not coming up in a conversation, what a loss, right? What a loss. And another thing that is super valuable is to somehow incorporate student interests and choices. So let's look at a reworking of that prompt now. So instead of, do you need to go through a difficult experience yourself to learn a new lesson? After that, I changed it to this. We've been reading and discussing how important struggle is to learning lessons. Some people in class disagree. Work together with a partner to respond to someone who says, I don't need any difficult experiences to learn and improve. I can learn everything I need from TV shows and movies. Use evidence from the Wonder Horse and your own life experiences to support your response. It's long and it takes a little while to work through how to do this, but today I just want to share this idea with you that your prompt can actually be very explicit and direct in this way. So number one, to review in the orange there, it's a review of what we've already been discussing in class. And now, academically, in the blue at the end, use evidence from the Wonder Horse. It says specifically to do that. The green section is encouraging an exchange of ideas, and almost thinking through with each other how you can start a debate with this person who doesn't believe difficult experiences are important or useful. So you can see that there's a lot more clarity in this prompt than the original prompt. So that's the idea about prompts, but the other side of the coin here is mindset. I don't know whether you all have the same experience that I do. I give a conversation prompt. It could be a think, pair, share kind of idea, or a turn and talk, or maybe you're expecting a longer conversation. But once you give it and you say, okay, everyone talk, boy, there could be problems in the back of the room where you're not at, right? They might not be doing it properly. And eventually today, I'm going to get to how we can battle that problem. But first, what should conversations actually look like? And these are the things that we should really look to start instilling in our students. Everybody should have equal turns. I'm sure you all have seen conversations with people, with students in the classroom where one student really dominates the conversation and the other student just sort of lets that student do it. And we shouldn't allow our students to do this. Number one, that person who's dominating the conversation doesn't have all the answers. And number two, the person who's letting them dominate the conversation, they have important ideas to share with their classmates and eventually with the world. And we need to start encouraging that early. So equal turns is super, super important. Focus on the prompt too. We want to make sure that they're not getting off topic. The one that I feel like I've worked the most on is clarifying ideas. And I'll talk about that really shortly. And what can be the hardest is for students, and I think all students, not just what I have most experience with are English as a second language students, but can you actually build on each other's responses? Can you listen to what somebody says and then respond to what they say before you say, well, this is what I think. can you explore another idea first and build on it before you bring in something new that you want to talk about? I think we can see here, if we look at the conversation I've already shared with you, I guess we could say there are equal turns here. A speaks at length in the beginning, and then B speaks at a similar length, and then they end the conversation abruptly. So they do have equal turns. Focus on the prompt, I guess I can give them credit for that, but clarifying ideas, I mean, come on, there's no clarification here. And the example I can give for that for you is when we get into A at the beginning, I think the narrator didn't need this experience to learn what he learned because he can learn this lesson when another thing happened another day. So I think you don't need this experience, and he can also learn this in some stories. There are so many places in there that you can say, respectfully, what do you mean by somebody can learn this lesson when something else happens another day? What do you mean by that? Do you have an example? And really get students to start pushing for more, like, don't allow your classmate to get away with not clarifying their ideas. They deserve the opportunity to clarify their ideas and really push their language ability forward. That's why we're here, right? So working on clarifying ideas is super, super important. And what you need to do is really teach some terms of language. Just to share with you quickly before moving on, what the first thing that I did was just say, well, what do you mean by that? You can just ask, what do you mean by that? And then what'll happen is sometimes students will say something in the beginning and it's actually completely clear. There's nothing that needs to be clarified, but then students will just say, what do you mean by that? Because that's what we've been practicing. So the point I'm making here right now is when you're working on these mindsets, you have to expect that it's going to take a long time to build these skills, not a month, not a year. It's a multiple year thing. And hopefully this sort of culture of conversation can start building in your school community as you have conversations with other teachers about this. They need to, you give a suggestion, here's how you can clarify ideas, but of course you don't always have to use that. These conversations happen naturally. And so yeah, these are some things that need to be worked on for sure in classroom conversation. So here, how can we build a positive mindset toward conversation? And this is the thing that I really want to emphasize today, because it's what changed classroom conversations for me forever. We need to treat conversation like it's an assignment. Students need to hand in their conversations, literally. And then once they hand in their conversations, we can analyze their performance and we can design the next steps. And we can start using that sort of iterative or formative assessment model. Okay, we have data. This is what the conversation looks like. Now what's the next step? What should we work on next? If they don't turn it in, it's going to be very hard to work on building these skills. So how can we turn them in? This is how I did it. So luckily at my school, at the time, there was a massive influx of facilities of technology. So I could reserve iPads or laptops and bring them into the classroom. And I could have all of the students recording their conversations. And when they're done, they all have to turn it in. I worked with Google Classroom a bit on that. And also I would highly recommend, especially if you're in elementary or early secondary, Seesaw is a great platform for this, very secure, keeps all the students' information safe. But it's just a very intuitive, very organized platform where they can turn things like this in and other students can see each other's work. The reason this is so important, the reason I found that this is so important is that problem I mentioned earlier, when the people at the other side of the classroom where you as the teacher are not, they're not focused on the conversation, well, now they have to be, because they have to turn it in. And not only is the teacher going to hear it, but perhaps classmates will as well. And we know that that's the biggest fear probably of most students, or the biggest motivator to do a good job. So yeah, on the right-hand side, I mean, it does open up opportunities for peer feedback. And if the main point of this is reinforcing a positive mindset, I think it's very important if you're sharing student work, that students, if they're commenting on each other's work, they're commenting on the positives of it. So you can give them a focus, say clarifying ideas, and they comment on the positive things that they see or hear in that conversation. And this, of course, will highlight successes and reinforce that positive mindset. So you may be asking, I don't know, because we're not having a two-way conversation at this point, but you may be asking, well, what if we don't have iPads for every student? What if we don't have laptops for every student? What can we do then? There are a couple things to do. I'm going to share a few ideas later of classroom activities that are really helpful in building a positive mindset. But I would also encourage you, after getting maybe, if it's required of you, getting permission from parents to record student conversations, you can use your own phone or your own device, and you can place it down at a random conversation each time you have a classroom conversation, and you can record a few. And then one day maybe you get a really good example and you can play it for the class, and you could talk about it and talk about what went well and maybe what could have gone better. So I think that there are a lot of ways that you can work on handing in a conversation, and you all, I'm sure, have ideas that I've never thought of, and I'll look forward to hearing them when we get to the Q&A section, if you're willing to share. But moving on, this is an example of what some student recordings look like for me. So with iPads or tablets, like, it's really intuitive in how to set this up. This is actually just an app called Whiteboard, and there's a screen recording function in it. Or iPads and most tablets, they already have a screen recording function built in. So you can just have kids or students, I'm sorry, create a title page for their conversation, and when it's time, they start their conversation. And for me in my classroom, what I would do is I would have them airdrop all of their conversations to me at the end of class. But like I said, they could also turn it into some sort of platform, or they could share it with shared Google Drive. There are lots of ways that you could go about doing that. Another question that I think you might be asking at this point is, so do you listen to all those conversations? And like, I literally have like thousands of conversation recordings still, and it's still growing. But I don't listen to all of them because it is a lot of time. But I don't need to listen to all of them, I don't think. Every once in a while, I will have an actual assessment of conversation where I do listen to everyone's, and I do give them feedback on it. But for daily assignments, I'll listen to a selection of them, and then I'll create activities to build off of what I've heard from that selection. That's a secret that I would never tell the student, but that's how I handle the amount of time that it would take to actually listen to everything if you were to do that. So I would like to play an example of a recorded conversation from my class. And the prompt was, how would you define the difference between fears and phobias? Come to an agreement with using domain-specific vocabulary, practice throughout the unit, and your own real-life experiences and examples as illustrations. So if you remember the things that I said would be effective in a prompt, would be good characteristics of an effective prompt, I'm sorry. I think it's important to tell you as well that, like, I don't think that you should expect to add all of those characteristics to every prompt you make. But if you have a couple of them, it certainly should help. So in this one, how would you define the difference? Come to an agreement. There's what's built in there is that they're going to have to share and build ideas. They have to come to an agreement about how to define it. It's academic in that they have vocab that we've been practicing in class that they need to use here, and they can also, what'll be invisible for you here is they also have notes that they've taken throughout the unit in front of them that they can use in the conversation as evidence. And then they can also incorporate their own interests through adding their own real life experiences and examples as illustrations. So that's how I went about putting that prompt together. So let's take a listen.
So let's talk about fears and phobias. I think they're pretty similar, right? Well, how are fears and phobias different?
Phobias to, this says phobia caused by fears,
Phobias are caused by fears. What do you mean by that?
Like, if you are scared of something, and like you are scared of frog.
Frogs, okay.
Yeah.
You're scared
and
of
like,
frogs.
And you're scared of real frogs. And a phobia will become like somebody say frog, and you are say, oh my god, frog, and that will be a phobia. And fear is our basic emotion.
Okay, so I think what you mean is that phobias are like worse than fear, or more intense. Like if you're only afraid of frogs, like it's a normal fear, you'll only feel scared when you see them. But if it's a phobia, like whenever you see something related to frog, like for example, when you hear the word frog, or you see a picture of a frog, or even the color of a frog, you'll feel scared. I think that's what you mean, right?
Yeah, like fear. Fear is real thing is in front of you.
Okay.
Phobia is already in your mind. Like frog equals dangerous.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, in the book it says fear is triggered by something that's startling or unexpected.
Like,
so it doesn't really have to be dangerous, but it has to be sudden. Like for example, when the lightning flashes down and you see the flash and then you're scared by it. But phobias are caused by your experiences that triggers strong emotions.
like you hit by a teacher for a long time, 3 years, and in your mind, teacher will be hitter.
Hitter, okay.
Yeah, hitter. And you will be scared of teacher, and that's teacher phobia.
I don't know if that's a real word, but okay.
Yeah, but if it's fear, you are just scared by that teacher hits you, not every teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, phobia will be every teacher equals hitter.
Okay, so basically fear is when you fear is about something in front of you, and phobia is about your experience, and
it's already planted in your mind.
Yeah, okay. So I think that probably clearly defines the difference between fear and phobias.
All right, so I thank you for listening to that 3-minute conversation. There are some things that they did really well. There are some things that they could still work on. So the point should never be to have a perfect conversation, because it doesn't exist. There's nothing perfect. You're always going to mess up what you say the first time. And if you have a classmate who's willing to help you clarify those ideas and you can work together, you can get some really fun ideas that pop out. So I thought the one student really acted as a moderator, facilitator in that discussion, and was pulling some ideas out of the other student, the frog phobia and the teacher phobia. But that student who was the facilitator, he maybe spoke a little bit more in certain areas, so he was dominating a little bit. But he did a good job of rephrasing and clarifying and really directing the conversation, and they did come to an agreement at the end. The other thing I wanted to point out with that audio is that you could hear the sound maybe in the background of other people having the same conversation at the same time. And so if you teach your students how to record with whatever the microphone on the device right up to them and pointing it to the speaker when they're speaking, the background noise doesn't cause a problem. You can hear all of them really, really quite clearly. So moving on, here are two activities that I find really helpful in building these mindsets and working towards better classroom conversations. So one is what's called a fishbowl conversation. And it's literally just pulling two students to the front of the classroom, and they perform a conversation in front of everyone. And afterwards, they receive feedback from both the students and the teacher. Typically, that should be focused on one sort of skill. I'll go back to my favorite, which is clarifying ideas. What you could do is, if you're not recording them, is you could give the classroom a prompt. They all are practicing it together, but they know that after they're done, you're going to randomly call on two people to do that conversation at the front of the classroom for everyone. So they better practice and be ready, shouldn't they? So maybe that's a way that they'll take it more seriously and more positively as well. And my favorite task is what's called a non-model. So what you as a teacher do is you pick a section of a conversation and you transcribe it. So I'll literally type it out, and then you print it out and you have students work on rewriting it. If you could do this conversation yourself, how could you improve it? And this is a really, really valuable tip. So here's an example from the class with the same conversation. So it started out from what I've already read a few times, so I'm not going to read it again. But one group's non-model turned into this, and you can see that there's actually multiple turns of conversation here. And there's going to be an attempt to clarify ideas, and they don't quite get there yet, right? That's what I said, it's a process. But they turned it into, I think the narrator didn't need to experience, I think the narrator didn't need to experience to learn what he learned. Why not? How can you learn then? This is a great question that B could ask. And then A says he could learn from stories, or when this happens another day. What stories and what does another day mean? So if I were to give feedback at this point, I would say if you ask for clarification, maybe just ask for one thing at a time. Asking for two complicates it. And maybe that's why A then still isn't very clear. It says the narrator can learn from others' experience and also learn from old stories people tell. B, I understand, but I'm not sure I agree. Then A says, I wonder why not? What do you think? And that's not the end of it, but I just want to give you the idea that when students have the time to look at a conversation and then rewrite it, focusing on things that you've been talking about in class, this will really start to instill these conversational practices and positive mindsets in a way that wouldn't happen without it. So let's review. The things that we talked about today were the idea of constructing a prompt thoughtfully, making it academically engaging, making it a requirement to really share ideas and build on ideas. These points are really critical if you want to have better classroom conversations. And then how to build that culture of conversation, which the idea I wanted to share with you today is that the process of turning it in can really be a game changer. And then after they're turned in, reflecting upon the conversations, looking at them together, analyzing them, talking about how it could go better next time, and then doing it again and trying it again. Keeping that going throughout the year, it can really, really be a helpful process. So that's what I have to share with you guys today. I thank you so much for being here. And at this point, we'll open it up for Q&A.
Thank you so much, David. I've seen a whole host of comments. There's huge engagement in the chat window. Many people have really enjoyed your presentation. I think the probably the major point was the question or the issue about the teacher hitters. We saw probably more comments at that point than any time. But whilst we were just waiting for people to put some questions in, please do show your appreciation for David. I think you really enjoyed the presentation as much as I do. Do please type clap into the chat box. That's great. And whilst we're waiting there for some of the questions to come in, could I just ask you to stop sharing your screen? for a second, and then two of us will become.
My screen, right?
Yes, yeah, if you can, that's
right.
it, perfect. There's just the two of us now on screen. So whilst we're waiting for people to pop some questions into the Q&A box, one of the things that has come up in many of the presentations that we've had, not just this week, but also in some of the previous webinars that we've been doing, focuses a lot on I think, a lot of what you were saying there, that when you ask students to do a task like a discussion, they're often focused on trying to say the words that the teacher wants them to do. The purpose of the activity is to get the right words out of their mouths with the correct grammar. And thus at the end, as you said right at the beginning, we're done. The purpose isn't actually to have a conversation with another student. It's actually to get through the activity.
Yeah.
And that's it. And it's, you know, one of those bizarre situations where only in an English language classroom can you have the conversation, what time is it? It's 4 o'clock. That's right. I mean, I can never imagine ever asking somebody for the time and then replying, that's right. So on that slightly amusing note, audience, I think that this is one of the things that you're suggesting in many ways that you need to instill in the students, that the students need to be having this discussion, not for the purpose of the teacher to assess them, but also to convey information to other people. What do you do to help your students transition in the classroom from using English to show that they can do it and be assessed by the teacher, to using English to convey a meaning that they can then have a discussion and share ideas, maybe come to some kind of mutual agreement or even mutual disagreement in the class? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really just about really celebrating when somebody comes up with a really interesting idea and just talking about that idea. And saying, well, okay, you've got somewhere here. And I want to go back to the point you were making about how a lot of students, they just want to be correct the first time they say something and finish the task. But when they come up with a great idea and you bring focus on that, I think that starts to open their minds to like, oh, actually, we're looking to get to somewhere unexpected. Not what is an expected correct answer. We're looking for creativity. We're looking for a real new idea to come out of that. And when that happens, it's quite exciting. One thing that I would say is there's a lot of discussion about grouping of students by level. And what I've actually found out, maybe it could be considered a bit counterintuitive. When the students are the same level, I actually find that the conversations are not as interesting. There's a relaxation there. When you have a student of higher proficiency and lower proficiency, that student of higher proficiency now has some work to do. They've got to figure out what the other student's saying. And the student of lower proficiency has to also step up their game. And what you have is this real excitement of ideas now, because there's a nervousness there. There's an uncomfortableness there, I think. And so I think just celebrating those ideas, and then at the same, we'll work on the grammar. We'll work on that at the same time, but let's now just focus on ideas and celebrate them. That's how I think you can get to that more positive mindset about conversation that you were asking about.
No, indeed. I mean, I think there was a session just before yours as well by Tanya McAndy that also spoke a little bit about the grouping of students and where you might want to do and what you might want to consider. And it's interesting also the idea of just stepping up the game and the slightly different roles that each person would play when you're pairing people. One of the questions that I've seen here in the Q&A box comes from Angelina Carpio Reyes, and she asks any suggestions on developing oral questioning skills. I'd like to take that question there and just go beyond it and say, because I think that you addressed this to a degree in your presentation, and you talked about clarifying. And this was, I think, one of the points as an example you chose to say. What other skills do you tend to find are critically important to raise awareness of in your students in order for them to be able to interact properly?
Okay, so I would say, other than clarification, when I started out with it, the other thing that I really wanted to do was I wanted students, but what I would often hear is, I'm going to paraphrase. This is my idea. Well, what I think is this. Okay. Okay. So I actually made it, they were not allowed to do that. If this person shares an idea first, you're going to then, if you're going to ask for clarification if you need it, but if you don't need it, you're going to ask for an example from them. Like, what do you mean by that? Can you illustrate that? They share an example. And then after they share the example, this person has to add their own example for that idea. And we've got to just focus on that idea first before you go to your own thing that you want to share. Because everyone wants to share their own idea, but let's be respectful of the other person first. That's something that I really, really wanted to work to instill, and give each idea the value and the respect that it deserves, before forgetting about it. So I would say that. In terms of the oral questioning, I'm not exactly sure what it refers to, but in terms of working on how to ask questions, yeah, that's a difficult one. And what it makes me think of is a lot of people use things like prompt cards, but I would actually, for a conversation like this, I would not suggest using that because it can actually be quite restricting. And instead of the conversation flowing naturally in all of its confusion, it gets sort of caught up in these little boxes that are on these cards. So I think in terms of working through questioning and things, my answer to that would be that I think once you start recording and looking at some of these conversations, it'll be really clear to you and the students that you have what exactly it is that would make a better conversation. And then you can go about and focus on that one thing with them, and work out how to build those conversational skills so that each time they do it, they get better at that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I remember also when I was a starting teacher as well, one of the things that I grew to be frustrated with was whenever the materials that I was using suggested a discussion, essentially people were prompted with the I agree and I disagree or I don't agree. And I just thought, well, neither of those sounds right to me. I mean, it's not often that you say I agree unless you absolutely 100% agree. But how often do you have people actively disagreeing with you in your face? And that there was very little, attention given to how you might disagree softly. But even more so, and I think that this is the thing that you're getting at, which is how do you partially agree, and how do you come to maybe some kind of joint understanding or joint agreement of or even a compromise, even if the compromise doesn't exactly say what you want to say, at least you can be comfortable with that as being your pair attitude or your group attitude.
Yeah,
I'd like to change questions slightly then, and I'm going to look. I noticed a number of questions, but I see one here from Feroz Akbarov, who is he said he often faces the problem of getting reserve students involved in class discussion, and I've seen that a couple of places already, which is, you've addressed the issues of maybe those who feel more comfortable speaking and those less comfortable, or possibly at a level of ability. But what about in terms of personality? You do have the extrovert students and you do have the introvert students.
Yeah. So I think that so you do certainly have to create an environment where everyone feels safe. So I think that recording sort of, in the beginning, maybe you don't want to make it public with sharing it with other students when you're first starting out. So they would record something and they turn it into you. In that case, it's still anonymous. And so for the kids who might be less comfortable having their voice heard at that point, you can make it a requirement of them that they do have to participate. They do have to have a conversation with someone, and it does have to be recorded, but don't worry, it's safe. Your classmates aren't going to hear it at this point. And just work on, if you give them some time to get comfortable with the idea of this, I think that as they practice it, they'll get confident with how to do these turns, and then they'll be less sort of afraid to share what they make. Yeah, so I mean, I know we've got to tread lightly with those students, but I think that there's a way to be patient with it. Keep it anonymous when it needs to be, and let them shine when they do something really well. So maybe one of those reserve students handed in a recording that's amazing, and you go over to them and say, "Man, your recording was amazing. Would you mind if I shared it with the class? Because like I think it was one of the best things I've heard this year." What a wonderful thing that would, I would hope that my own kid would get that that kind of confidence given to them by their teacher. So yeah, just wait for that moment to give them that boost, and maybe they'll be less afraid to share it in the future.
Indeed. I mean, I think there's an important point there of scaffolding of confidence as well. I mean, it's not just about giving the language that people need in order to succeed, but also this feeling that they can do it. And I think somebody needs to have seen themselves succeed in order to feel comfortable doing something in public. On that note, then, I would like to bring the presentation to a close there. Could I ask you all once more, if you would, just to show your appreciation to David for this fantastic presentation he's done on how to engage our students with discussion in the classroom.
Thank you all for joining. It was a real pleasure, and I just want to be clear, I didn't hit the students. That was pure creativity.
Indeed. We would know that you would never do that anyway.